What is up, one and all? Welcome to a new video, a new Thoughts On. Today we're talking about the rare 10th game in a 10-year franchise. Seriously, how often does that happen? Unless your initials are COD or 2K, I guess. You get the gist, you catch my joke there. Anyway, we're talking about Assassin's Creed Origins today. The first Assassin's Creed game from Ubisoft after a year off in what is normally an annual release. Seriously, Assassin's Creed games have been annually released since its third game. Not 3, Brotherhood, since Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. It's led to a lot of fatigue. A lot of people are clearly fatigued with this series. Both from a critical perspective, people don't like a lot of the recent games, and in terms of how many people are buying them. Sales have definitely been steadily going down since Assassin's Creed 3, and that really says a lot about people's perception of this series. Taking a step back, taking a year off, and reevaluating the series was for the best. It is a make-or-break moment for the series. The success of this game directly affects and impacts the future of this franchise and how Ubisoft handles it. That being said, that leads us to the make-or-break question. Is this game good? We'll have to find out. These are my thoughts on Assassin's Creed Origins. Now, before I dive too deep into any of these thoughts on videos, I like to address the elephant in the room, the controversy surrounding a game's launch, if you will, because that tends to happen with a lot of new games these days. In the case of Origins, there are really 2 issues you should be aware of as a consumer. The first of that is an e-store, essentially a microtransaction store that sells outfits, weapons, shield items, map like boosts and time saver boosts and stuff like that for money, for actual money, or as the game would put it, Helix credits. You stick your credit card into your console and bop, you got some Helix credits. It doesn't work like that. I feel like that eventually will be a thing, though. You'll eventually be able to stick your credit card to swipe it through your console. Anyway, that aside, this seems kind of harmless, and it really is kind of harmless, especially compared to the microtransaction store in previous games. Even if it is really harmless, I don't feel it's right to have this in a single-player video game. I will never, ever support microtransactions in a AAA $60 video game, no matter the reason. It doesn't belong here. So if that's something you're strongly against, even though it doesn't affect the gameplay experience at all, then you've been warned. The other controversy here is specifically for PC players, and that is the DRM software that's with this game. Ubisoft has not 1, but 2 layers of DRM running in the background of this game while you're playing it. So essentially you have anti-piracy software called De Novo, which is meant to prevent it from being cracked from pirates and so forth. But De Novo isn't always reliable because a lot of developers use it and it has been cracked a lot over time. So, instead of finding a new anti-piracy software, what they do is add even more padding to that padding and add a second layer of DRM to protect the anti-piracy software. And what you get is a game that abuses your CPU performance. I do not support this at all. I get it. Ubisoft does not want pirates to get to their game, and maybe one day we'll be at a point where that can happen. But all things considered, if you're willing to hurt your paying customers' experience with the game just to entice more people to actually buy it, I think that's a mistake, and they should really be doing the opposite. 2 controversies you should be aware of, 1 for PC players, 1 for everybody. Not that big of a deal compared to the stuff that surrounds other games like Shadow of War or Battlefront 2, but still something that I felt should be addressed. Now we get to the fun part of the review, talking about the story. I think people really overlook the importance of the stories in Assassin's Creed. I made a narrative analysis of Black Flag recently on the channel. Go check it out if you're interested. But essentially I was highlighting how people play up the characters of this series. People always talk about the great characters in Assassin's Creed, yet they never talk about the plots themselves. Because the reality is, the characters are great, but the plots are kind of forgettable and sometimes boring even, especially when you combine it with the mission gameplay that a lot of previous Assassin's Creed games have. For this series to continue, they need to reevaluate not just the gameplay, but their approach to storytelling. And I think in many ways they definitely did that with Origins. In many ways it felt like a familiar thing. There are aspects of the story that felt familiar to previous entries in the series, but at the same time, I think there's enough new here to justify calling it an overall success. Let me dive into that a little bit more. Because this is in ancient Egypt, 48 BCE. They heavily, and let me say heavily, explore the history of this time. Seriously, if you are a fan of ancient Egyptian history, you're a fan of Cleopatra and the reign of Ptolemy, and everything having to do with that, even the Romans, Julius Caesar and all that. This game is, excuse my French here, fucking incredible. The history they dive into with this era is so damn interesting and fascinating. In essence, the story is essentially telling the story of ancient Egypt, right? Telling the story of this time period. So you directly have a hand in the conflict, the primary conflicts that take place during this time period. And all that eventually, let me just say eventually, leads into what is essentially the origin story for the Assassins versus Templars conflict. I'm just going to say that the way that they set up, without spoiling too much at all, the way that they set up the Assassins and the Templars in this game is done very subtly. It makes sense. If you are an Assassin's Creed fan, if you've played any of the previous games, you know anything about the lore or the lingo or any of the things about Assassins or Templars, there are moments in this game that will excite the hell out of you, because there were connections that this game made to other games and to other things in the series where I went, oh, that's cool. And overall, it left me a very satisfied Assassin's Creed fan. This game will remind you, if you at one point loved Assassin's Creed or enjoyed any of the games, it will remind you kind of what makes the story in these games really interesting and compelling. It's definitely one of the better narratives in the series, for sure. And in terms of its characters, because of course that is something people always love, I think people will have a lot of good things to say about the characters here as well. The main character you play as is Bayek of Siwa. He is a Magi, in fact, the last of the Magi. Him and his wife Aya, who's also playable in different parts of the game, not all the time, but she's somewhat playable at parts of the game, is also a Magi. They're essentially Egyptian sheriffs, right? They watch over their land, they make sure the Egyptian people are happy, they solve problems. It's honestly pretty cool. What we get here is basically a guy who already has a sense of duty by the time you start the game. And that sense of duty, and plus a very simple, easily predictable motive, is what sets him forward in his journey. Now, on that motive, like I said, when I said aspects of the story felt familiar to other games, that is the thing that felt familiar, is that motive. It is getting a little old. I would like to see more inventive characters like Edward Kenway going forward. Not saying I wasn't satisfied with Bayek of Siwa, because I absolutely loved Bayek, especially the actor who played him. I want to say Abukar Salim played him. Don't quote me on that. I think that's his name. I don't know, but he did a fantastic job performing Bayek. There's some incredible performance moments from him in this game where my mouth was on the floor. There were some incredible moments across the board in terms of performance in this game. You really hit up a lot of characters that you only meet for maybe a few minutes, but in those few minutes they become instantly impressionable. They aren't wild or wacky or zany or fun necessarily. They just have a very distinct perspective and care about their world. They occupy a very particular corner in whatever aspect of the world you find them in, and I think that's what makes them interesting. And that's weirdly how you can connect with these characters as Bayek in just a short span of time. There really are some incredible moments in the story with characters that I wasn't expecting to feel emotion for their loss, but I did, even though I didn't know them for that long. And let me just say, the modern day story as well, let me touch on that. I won't say anything about it other than I think the modern day narrative for this game is finally back on track. They finally have a direction going forward, and it leaves me very excited for the future of the series, wherever they go in the modern day story. So, GG Ubisoft for finally doing something good with modern day. I was very satisfied. Now we dive into gameplay, starting with the open world, because this is an Ubisoft open world game, and they have a very infamous reputation for being collectathons, i.e. something that's big, maybe beautiful, sometimes they're, kind of mediocre, and filled with a ton of shit, really, just a ton of shit that you don't want to do. Does Origins have that problem? I want to say mostly no, a little bit yes, but the thing I really want to touch on here more than anything is the open world itself. Ancient Egypt, shit, the country of Egypt and parts Libya. Oh my god, this game's open world is incredible. I love The Witcher 3, right? I love the open world of The Witcher 3, but from a design standpoint, I think Origins may just be one of the most well-designed open worlds I've ever played in. The thing here about Ancient Egypt is that it's parts a recreation of what Ancient Egypt probably looked like at the time, or at least what we know about the appearance of Ancient Egypt from that specific time period, and parts the fictional filling of the gaps for that time period. The things that we don't know, the things that historians probably assume about the appearance of Ancient Egypt. That blend is what allows for an incredibly dynamic and varied open world with a variety of vistas and interactive settings and sights to see and secrets to explore. There's a lot of deep crevices and hidden areas in this world that you would never expect to see, and even for the areas that you run through so often, if you ever just stop and take a walk and look around some of the settings, some of the towns, the cities in this game, you will notice a breathtaking attention to detail. Things that have both a historical purpose and an interactive purpose, in the sense that everything in the world is there for a reason. It's not just set dressing, as it might come off as in other Assassin's Creed games. There are videos all over YouTube describing and kind of depicting a lot of the crazy quote-unquote details that are in this game. Stuff like weapons sinking in the sands and blood being dispersed in the water. Same thing with oil. The NPCs have day and nighttime cycles, very much like Metal Gear and The Witcher. There's a lot of pyrotechnics, so you can set things on fire with your torch. You can set your bow on fire. Your character can actually catch on fire, and the only way to avoid that is to hit the dodge button enough times until you roll on the ground, and then, you know, the fire goes out. Stop, drop, and roll, of course. They do, just like the story, they do diligence to fill the setting with lots and lots of interesting history, especially through the side quests that you play. As many as there are, not a whole lot of them are all that memorable. However, the little interactions you have in these side quests, these little snapshots of, if you will, in your adventure through Ancient Egypt, I think are elevated a little bit more by the fact that, of course, they are in this setting. That they all, in some strange way, paint a specific picture of what life was like for the people in Ancient Egypt at this time in history. It's those aspects of it that kept me engaged and continually wanting to play more side quests, even though they aren't written all that well. You don't have collectibles per se, but you do have sort of what I'd like to call checklist objectives. So you go into any hidden area in this world, or any special area. In fact, when you hop on a viewpoint, you know, where you usually do the pan around, you synchronize, you leap down into a bale of hay, and then parts of the map are opened up to you. You still do have that here, and I think this is the most useful it's ever been, because it does reveal locations on the map that weren't previously revealed to you, and those pop up as question marks, yet another Witcher 3 inspiration. And these question marks definitely aren't as interesting as they are in The Witcher 3, and you realize that very early on, which I think in ways kind of hurts the exploration, at least compared to other games in the genre, specifically, again, The Witcher 3. But what you do at these locations always revolves around some sort of checklist. Collect 2 treasures, kill this one captain, kill this one commander, and it's just a matter of finding it all out, figuring it all out. Yes, everything you do in these areas is useful, because once you complete all the objectives in an area, you get XP for that. And I think that is a decent enough incentive to do all of these. Plus, because the setting is so varied and different, it's kind of similar to, say, Mad Max. You know, the Mad Max game that came out 2 years ago. One of the things I said about that was that the objectives for that game were so damn repetitive. However, you persistently completed all of them, because the world in itself was so different wherever you went, that it felt interesting enough and compelling enough to keep doing these same objectives over and over and over. And that really also applies to Origins, where completing the same objectives over and over and over remains interesting, not just because of the world also, but also because of the gameplay here. And I think that's a nice segue into gameplay. Let's talk about perhaps the two most critical aspects of the gameplay here, combat and stealth, starting with combat. Assassin's Creed prides itself on being a stealthy game. The assassins wear hoods, they work in the shadows, they're a social stealth, so it makes sense that if you want to emphasize stealth, you can't make combat easy. You need to make combat challenging. You need to incentivize players to do stealth because it is easier for the player to avoid complications through stealth. I think Origins is maybe not a dead-on achievement of that idea. However, it is the closest any Assassin's Creed game has ever gotten to incentivizing stealth over combat because of the complications incurred by combat. Because the combat system here, though not superbly well designed, has depth. It does have a surprising amount of depth. It essentially revolves around, spatial separation from your enemy, moving around, lock-on targeting, the range of your weapon matters, how close in proximity you are to your target when you swing your weapon. Your health, it regenerates slowly, but you don't have like an instant med kit you can use like you had in the past with previous Assassin's Creed games. And considering that I played the game on hardest difficulty, it made combat encounters a lot juicier and a lot more critical to the overall game experience, because the only means of success is to defeat my opponents. I can't really cheat my way out of that scenario. Some ideas don't feel like they were completely finished. Some things feel like they were functional in the time that they made the combat system. For example, the dodge. It's just a tad off of being an adequate dodge from an enemy's attack. Sometimes I have to dodge multiple times usually, and that usually would have just been solved by adding a roll button, very much like The Witcher 3. And in general, there is a big problem with hit detection and hitboxes as well here. There are times where my weapon shouldn't be hitting the enemy, and it does, especially on horses, and I can understand why they did that. The horse combat here is probably the best horse combat I've ever played in a video game. Let me just touch on that. Though there is a very noticeable hitbox problem where I'm swinging my sword or my weapon and it doesn't really connect with the enemy, and I still kill them. And that also, and this is the problem, it also goes vice versa, where the enemy doesn't really connect with me, yet they get hit points. And this is an egregious and noticeable problem. And as well, a very noticeable thing, even before playing the game, is the animations for combat. There are some weird animations throughout this game, and I think that mostly chalks up to them saving money in the mocap or the animation department, so they didn't have to mocap a lot of the animations for this game. But I think the combat system really could have benefited from it. If it's something that they did where they mocap the animations, they just sped them up incredibly, it still looks very unnatural, and I don't know if I am a fan of that decision. To counter that, I think the speed of this combat system is part of why it makes it so fun, and why I had so many fun combat encounters in this game. And to that end as well, another reason the combat manages to be so much fun in spite of those problems is the variety of weapons here. There's more weapons in this game than there has ever been in any previous Assassin's Creed game. You have spears, scepters, dual knives, kopeshes, regular swords, just a little bit of everything here. Heavy blades, heavy maces, just a little bit of everything for everyone. But you'll definitely have favorites in this game. I think my favorite either was the scepter or the dual blade, specifically when you go into adrenaline mode, which is another mechanic of this combat system that essentially acts as a, you got enough hits on this enemy, here's your power up. I really like that mechanic of the combat, actually. I wasn't expecting to really care for it because it seemed sort of tacked on, but these short bursts of going into adrenaline mode, dealing double damage, going faster, attacking faster, made the combat system, honestly, a lot more interesting. I'd like to say that this is the best combat system we've had in the series, and if you're playing this game, it will take you a little bit of time to get used to. Starting out the game, I wasn't sure if I even was willing to keep playing the game. I was thinking of refunding Origins on Steam because of the combat system. It was really just putting me off, and it's the first thing they actually throw at you in the tutorial. They should have started you off with something quiet, worked you into the more complicated system of the game, which was the combat. They really should have done that in reverse. However, for what it is, and when you eventually get used to it, it is very satisfying and very fun. So this is something they could definitely work on in the future. The other pillar of gameplay I obviously got to touch on here is stealth. Stealth. Starting out the game, you're only going to be able to crouch, sneak through enemy encampments, climb through bushes, stalk around and stuff like that, hide, the usual. So there's not a whole lot of variety there, and playing that simple mundane experience can get boring. Only being able to use the hidden blade especially. Heck, if you don't upgrade your hidden blade at all, which is a mechanic in this game, then that can especially get a little boring and frustrating and tiresome. However, as you start to level up, and especially after you start to put stuff into your skill tree, which is a big mechanic of the RPG system in this game, then you start to unlock more abilities and skills and tools. Probably some of the coolest tools for stealth in this game are, I'd say, a flesh decay toxin. What you do with this is you stick it in a body or a corpse or someone that you've killed, right? It emits a toxin into the air that when enemies walk over it or walk around it or through it, they're infected by the toxin, and slowly, very slowly, it ticks off their health all the way to 0. But there are some other things you can mess around with here. There are sleep darts, like there were in previous games. However, here, they don't last as long, which I thought was a good idea, because you can't just easy town through an area now. They're only asleep for maybe only 10 seconds when you use the dart. You do have like a berserk, like oil, or that you could put on your blade, and it sends enemies a berserk. Didn't care for that so much, but I can understand why they had it. You have fire bombs, not so stealthy, but the pyro mechanics in this game allow that to be really useful. You can essentially burn down an entire village if every house is made of straw, and there are some areas where guards are in the game where they do that. So, hey, it's actually pretty viable to use that sometimes. And there's a few other things here and there, but most importantly I should touch on is the bow and arrow, and that really brings me to the bow and arrow system in this game. Hold left trigger, he brings it out, and you have a variety of bows here, which is fun. Definitely the best, probably the best mechanic that's in the stealth system in the game is that stealth, that predator bow, especially once you upgrade it to have remote control arrows. This was something that I think everyone saw at E3 and cringed a little, because remote control arrows have no place in a game about ancient Egypt, nor do our remote control eagles, but I think both of those mechanics worked out well. Anyway, back to the arrow. I wasn't expecting to enjoy that mechanic, but it's honestly my favorite ability in the whole game, the ability to control the direction of your arrows. You can guide your arrow around a corner to a target that you would have normally not hit unless you were more in the open. So you can manage to stay stealthy but still use it. And heck, this is even useful in combat, because whenever you fire it, it slows down time. You can move it through an area as you're in the middle of combat, get an archer that's picking off your health from above and land a headshot and solve the problem really quickly, because it does travel in slow-mo. So in conclusion about the stealth, I think the thing that elevates the stealth system from being just a simple crouch around a camp, stab some dudes, get what you need to get, and get out type of gameplay loop are those tools, are the stuff like the flesh decay toxin, the bow and arrow, the variety of things you have at your disposal to pick off enemies and sneak through a restricted area. Those are the things that kept the stealth system fun and engaging, and made every single stealth encounter, for the lot of them that there are in this game, fun. It could have been better with, like I said, more interesting mechanics, and even more tools in fact, but for what it is, it services the gameplay loop well, and the variety of environments that you encounter throughout these camps, some being in cities, some being in the desert, some being in sort of rocky canyon areas, as well as the different locations they're placed in, kept it interesting and engaging, and it went well with the combat in terms of a gameplay loop. And that leads me to the final area of the game I want to talk about, the RPG systems. I don't say Assassin's Creed is better as an RPG than it is as an action game, because it's clear Ubisoft is an amateur when it comes to developing RPGs. This is not a genre they've really toiled in that much. They've always had light RPG mechanics in all their games, but they've never had something full-on and as embraced as what it is here. I like a lot of these ideas. Like I said, it's a good thing for the series, but it's not perfect. Loot especially is a big problem, because you do get a lot, and I mean a lot, of throwaway loot. A lot of things that you will look at, go, oh, okay, dismantle it or sell it, and then never think about it ever again. And that is a bit of a problem for a game with a game in ancient Egypt, with as much architecture and historical presence and just overall culture that you could have packed into that system. You do have a variety of weapons, yes, but all those weapons look fairly identical within themselves. Every khopesh you get will look the same. Every scepter you get is going to look basically the same. Every pike you get is going to look the same. Every heavy blade, every heavy blunt, every sword, every twin blade, you know, you get the idea. There is a variety of weapons to choose from, but within those categories of weapons, there isn't any variety at all. Yes, you do get upgraded versions of those weapons throughout the game, and you can actually upgrade your own weapons as well, but doing that isn't really satisfying, and you never form an attachment with your weapons. It feels more like a necessity to the game's progression system than it does as something the player actively wants to do. And going forward, that's something I think they need to address. They need to not throw so much loot at the player and focus more on making each piece of loot memorable. It almost feels to me like in the planning phase for this game, when they decided they wanted it to be an RPG, they originally planned on having lootable weapons, shield, item upgrades, and armor. But over time, they dropped that concept in favor of cosmetic appearances and just relegated it to weapons. And what they had was an overabundance of weapon loot in the game, and all that loot, most of that loot being fairly forgettable. At the same time, the skill tree in this game, it's good. Again, like the RPG system, the looting system, it's good. But it could use some work. There's a lot of cool abilities to unlock here, but there's a lot of things that I didn't really care for, and I felt there was a lot of abilities that could have been here and should have been here, such as something that reduces the noise you make while running in an area. There's nothing like that here. There's nothing to really benefit how stealthy you are in an area. They kind of just go, here, take it as is. In fact, there's an overall lack of options for stealth players here, which is weird. They have Seer, which is more like an economy-focused part of the tree. You have Warrior, which of course emphasizes combat. And then you have Hunter, which of course emphasizes the bow and arrow gameplay and a little bit stealth. But frankly, I think the game would have gained a lot from having more options there. Having a little bit more for stealth players so that they feel that that's an aspect of the game that they can improve and work on, not so much just the other aspects. And that really leads me into my overall conclusion for this game. Assassin's Creed Origins is undoubtedly a game that is rough around the edges, but in spite of that, in spite of the things that could obviously be improved, it's clear that Ubisoft put in a lot of effort into reinventing this series and reevaluating ideas that didn't work and trying to incorporate new things that could work. This wasn't just some attempt to, build off The Witcher 3 or Metal Gear Solid 5. Clearly they were inspired by those games, very clearly, but they weren't trying to make those games again. They were trying to use what those games have taught them about their own genre and use it to build the future of the series. And they absolutely succeeded in doing that. I think for the first time in a long time, Assassin's Creed has a future. Maybe Assassin's Creed Origins isn't the best game ever. It isn't the game of the year. But I feel like the sequel to this game could be the best game ever, could be the game of the year. They've laid a very solid foundation for the future of the series, and it leaves me very excited for where the story goes in terms of the modern day story, and heck, they could do more stuff in this period of time in ancient Egypt, maybe take us to Rome, and I would be thoroughly satisfied. And though I've compared this game heavily to other Assassin's Creed games and kind of defined its place in the series, which is very important because this is the 10th game in a 10-year series, it's also important to stack this game against other games in its genre, against other open-world games. And if you look at open-world games, especially those that have come out this year, this game, frankly, pushes the bar quite a lot, which is a really good thing to see. Origins is a fantastic, excellent game. In spite of its flaws, in spite of its problems, it is, honestly, in my opinion, worth the money and will give you plenty of enjoyment well after you think you're ready to put down the game after playing hours and hours and hours of it. So, overall, guys, that is Assassin's Creed Origins. Folks, let me know in the comments below what you thought of my review, and have you played the game, and if so, what do you think of it? Do you like Origins? Do you not like Origins? Let me know. I want to hear your thoughts. Let's all have a thoughts on Origins in the comments below. Let's get a discussion going. I want to thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please rate, comment, and subscribe. Check out my other videos upcoming and prior to. Stay tuned for more videos coming up on the channel. A lot of Star Wars content on the way. More episodes from the Frosty Crystal podcast. And just a lot of fun surprises. Follow me on Twitch as well. I streamed my entire playthrough for this game, which is the footage you saw in this video. I'll be streaming new games coming out in the future, like Battlefront 2. So that's all I gotta say, guys. Thank you all for watching, and I'll be seeing you all later. Peace out, guys.